Hi, everybody. Let me know when you can see and hear me coming through clearly. That maybe will improve things somewhat. Hello, Linda. Now you can see me. Fantastic. I'm frozen, am I? I've just moved. I think it was just a little dead spot. So hopefully that has alleviated that. But do let me know if that is still causing an issue, and I'll move further along or across the road. It's frozen. Let's still see if we are. Is that any better? Back? Good. Yeah, I think it's just a particular spot I was stood there. So, best now at buffering. Just try and refresh at your end, Dawn. And let's hope that we can. We'll be set up walking in just a minute or two. So, hopefully that will be the end of it. So, is it running okay now? Do let me know. I'm seeing lots of greetings one and all, but evacuate from Milton. Fabulous, glad you're staying safe. Oh, Michelle, good, fantastic. Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you on. So I do hope that I'm coming through without any buffering, without any problems. But if you just confirm that for me, that would be most grateful. Yeah, absolutely terrible, isn't it? It's still a bit buffering, but we'll get better as Dawn. Yeah, I think it will, Dawn. We're just in a kind of place. Is it buffering for others or just me? See what, I'll try. See if I can cross the road. Let's see if that'll if that helps at all. Generally, the signal's pretty good here, so we shouldn't much have hit one of the few sort of weak spots of the town. So hopefully fine here. So hopefully we're there or thereabouts. Does that seem a reasonable place now? I hope so. So we're almost at 6 o'clock. So I think that we're okay, Trist. So I think we're on 6 o'clock. So I think we're gonna start. So I'm going to say welcome one and all to Beverley. You see the sign which on the outside of Beverley right now. A place called Molescroft, very near to town centre. We're in Beverley, in East Yorkshire. So we've not been to East Yorkshire for ages, and now 2 in 2 weeks, and it's Stamford Bridge and now Beverley. So we're more than making up for that gap. And Beverley is a really kind of fabulous place. I think you can absolutely love it. But today, I decided, as we're sort of approaching Halloween, for this tour and the next sort of couple, we're going to try and get a little bit of darkness in there and kind of reflect this kind of time of year. So I thought we'd do it. There's some fantastic narratives around crime and punishment in Beverley. So I thought we would figure on that today and come back at another time to tell some more general history. So we're starting appropriately on, or we were doing, so dead spot, appropriately, is Gallows Lane. How appropriate is Gallows Lane to have an internet dead spot? It is, of course, a marker of the site of the gallows in the medieval period. And they were owned, bizarrely, by the Archbishop of York. So in 1293, King Edward I reconfirmed the right of the Archbishop of York to operate an entire legal system covering Beverley with his own courts, jail and gallows. But actually, believe it or not, even royal powers had limitations here in Beverley. So we're going to walk on now and talk about this fascinating and intriguing place and its peculiar history in what you might call crime, law enforcement, punishment, a whole bunch of things. So we're coming together to hopefully will kind of make sense. So there's a greater power here in Beverley, and that was the right to claim sanctuary. And it saw hundreds, mostly accused of murder, flock to Beverley in the medieval period to try and save themselves from those gallows. So it's an appropriate start point for the tour of the beautiful market town of Beverley that has a surprisingly dark underbelly. So I'm going to cross over and hopefully the signal will kind of hold for us as we begin to tell this story. So let's start off with a story of murder. This is the story of the murder of 3 sisters in Beverley, and it dates from 1860, around about the time this house here was built. And it remains one of the most infamous crimes in the town's history. The case, which continues to intrigue and baffle historians and true crime enthusiasts, was marked by the gruesome nature of the killings and the subsequent investigation that failed to bring the perpetrator to justice. The victims were 3 young sisters who lived in a small cottage in Beverley. And on the morning of August the 11th, 1860, their bodies were discovered by neighbours lying in a pool of blood in their home, with signs of a struggle and apparent violence at the scene. The murders were gruesome, involving blunt force trauma, and all 3 sisters had suffered severe head injuries. And their deaths were particularly shocking due to the violent nature of the crime, and the investigation quickly drew attention, with local authorities and the community coming together deeply concerned about their safety. And the case received much by way of media attention. I really love these houses, by the way. Sort of heightening public interest and fear. And the investigation led to several suspects, but eventually a man named William Gold was arrested. He was jailed here on what was the site of the House of Correction, which I'm just going to bring you around the corner around here on Norfolk Street, sorry. And he was known to have been seen near the sisters' cottage on the night of the killings. So Gold was charged with the murders, and he was sent to York Castle to stand trial for murder. But it seemed that the evidence was rather sort of circumstantial in nature, and so he was acquitted. And to this day, nobody knows who committed the crime. It's one of the great unsolved Victorian murders. And it fascinates, of course, in this community, in this kind of rather genteel town, where you wouldn't imagine these dark deeds to have taken place. So talking about kind of genteel, this neighbourhood, I suppose, is a kind of great example of that. You wouldn't really expect a prison to be located in a kind of leafy suburb as this. But actually, just across the road from where we are now, was the Beverley House of Correction. So Octagon House on Norfolk Street, we're just going to go across here, just bob through here, and you'll see that the house in front of you is, can you see that on the corner? It is octagon, 8-shaped is that house. So it's highly unusual, and it was noted apparently 7 years ago as being just one of only 3 octagonal shaped family homes in the whole of England. So if I come round the other side, you kind of see what I mean. It was converted to a house in 1880, but formerly it had been part of the prison, and it housed the turnkey, in other words, the guy who was in charge of the prison. So I'll just bring up for you a second an image, if I can, of a, and I haven't got it with me. But basically, it was right in the centre of the prison, and basically, the way it kind of worked was that by having 8 sides, the turnkey could look in every direction around the prison. It's very, very kind of clever sort of design. What I thought I had a photo, but I actually got the map then. If you can sort of see right on the left-hand side there, in the centre of the turnkey's house, then you've got various wings running off it. So basically what that allowed them to do, as I say, was to have sight lines down each of the prison wings. So it's very clever. So that was the House of Correction there. And it was a very attractive building and designed around the turnkey's house. So this 8-sided building, sorry, I'll just get rid of that for you. Sorry, that's it. There we go. So this was the guy that held all the keys to the prison and could view the sort of entire complex of all the yards across. So initially there were 22 cells in this prison, but by 1835 it increased to 126 cells. And the women were separated from the men, and convicted people were separated from those that were on remand, and vagrants were housed separately. And on admission, the prisoners were given a bath and supplied with regulation prison dress and a weekly change of linen. So as we come around here, you can see again these kind of corners, so you can understand how this is kind of working as a centre point to the prison. In fact, where we're sort of now walking across this grass, we're quite literally walking in the exercise yard. It's really ingenious, Fran. It's really kind of clever. And it works really well, obviously, as a private house as well. So on a mission, the prisoners are given a bath and prison dress, weekly change of linen, and then a very basic diet, with meat only on certain days. And in fact, convicts serving less than a week received no meat at all. Now, by 1878, the Houses of Correction were no longer used, and inmates from here were sent to prisons in West Riding, and the buildings were sold in 1880 to a local builder, a chap called Marmaduke Whitton. And some of the buildings were demolished, others converted to private houses. And part of this prison yard, as I say, remains, this lawn we're walking on here, is where Victorian prisoners would have exercised. It's fascinating. You wouldn't guess, would you, walking down a street like this, that we are walking through the site of a prison. So once the prison opened in 1809, sort of work began on replacing the medieval courthouse building with a purpose-built courthouse. That's what we're going to look at next. What's called the Sessions House building. So I'm being careful because I'm walking past the police station. I don't want them to think that I'm filming them, so we might just sort of sling our camera. What is it gorgeous around here? The houses here are really, really high quality. It is a delightful town. So, oh, in fact, look at that. Ogden House is for sale. So if you want to look up at that and go on to Hunter's estate agent board, you can actually see inside. So I dare say it'll be going for a sum that reflects its historic character. And unique. Who wouldn't want to say they live in only one of 3 octagonal houses? So the get a sip of water, and then we'll. Hey, Cheryl. Dawn, absolutely. The rooms will absolutely 100% reflect that, won't they? So, as I say, pretty unique. So the Sessions House, that we're about to see just around this corner, is built on the site of what previously been the Archbishop's Manor House. And in the early sort of 19th century, Justice of the Peace decided to allow the lease on the building they were using for the courthouse to lapse, so they could have a purpose-built building instead. And the building I'm about to show you is what they built. So new Sessions House, so session as in court sessions. So the new building, I say, I'll show you in one second. I'm just going to keep us focused away from the police station just for a minute, because obviously the police station is next to it, so it's still got, if you like, the feel of a kind of justice, sort of quarter, if you like, for want of a better description. Complex, perhaps a better word than quarter. So the new building was designed by Watson and Pritchett, through Yorkshire architects, and it was done in the classical style, completed in 1814. So very much brings to mind sort of scaled down version of the assembly rooms in York, very grand Palladian style. Isn't that lovely? We still see the Royal Coat of Arms. I'll go a bit closer. Unfortunately, it's got 2 skips outside of it today, which is not its best look. But can you see, if I can scan over there, you can see the Royal Crest. And up above the figure of Justice, I'll just come round. So you've got the Royal Coat of Arms, topped with the figure of Justice above. So a bit like the Bailey in London. So the court sessions and the petty sessions were both held here in this courtroom. So court sessions were held 4 times a year, hence quarterly, and heard the more serious of cases. And petty sessions from the dealt with kind of less serious offences. But nonetheless, the punishments will be seen these days as pretty harsh. So going through the records, I'll come up a little bit closer so you can sort of see some of the detail. It's now a kind of a really top-end kind of health and beauty sort of salon. So again, you be careful where I point the camera, but I don't think this bit is in use, at least not on a Sunday. So in July 1863, we have the record of a theft to the value of 1 shilling and 6pence, and for that paltry sum, the person convicted was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. Underage smoking was considered very serious. A typical sentence was up to 14 days imprisonment. And this was often given. The Beverley magistrates of 1862 made the statement that smoking brought on drinking, then gambling, and then stealing. So consequently, they felt it was a slippery slope. So cases of poaching were heard here frequently as well. And 2 cases from Christmas 1817 in which the accused had entered a woodland with a gun for the purpose of killing game. One was sentenced to 1 year in the House of Correction. The other was transported for 7 years. So, you know, of course, probably what you've got is the magistrates being landholders who took a very, very dim view of kind of poachers. But there was very little recourse to the poor once they fell sort of underneath the aegis, if you like, of the criminal justice system, they really were kind of thrown to the wall. So once they got incarcerated, Victorians believed that prisoners' lives should be made as hard as possible in order to stop them committing crimes in the future. So they therefore kind of experimented with kind of different kind of methods. So separation, segregation, silence, all kind of manners of ways of kind of breaking the spirit of prisoners by keeping them separate, meaning that they had, thank you, Cheryl, very, very kind of limited kind of social connection. But also they believed in things like using the treadmill. So by segregating them, the people who use the treadmill, if you know treadmills, basically, it was basically moving an enormous kind of weighted wheel round and around and around. It was a kind of soulless, crushing task. It was designed to break people, to kind of break the spirit, so that they could come out and they would thereafter be much more kind of amenable to living within the rules. So it really was kind of designed to break the spirit, but also it kind of broke the body. Again, I've got a picture of this, an illustration at the time of the, let me bring that for you, the treadmill. So you can see it was open at the back, so the townspeople could see what was going on. You can see the turnkey building in the background there. And basically, in the case of Beverley, they were crushing chalk to make whiting. But generally speaking, it was futile labour. It had no purpose other than basically just to break the kind of spirits. So they were silent. So by keeping them silent, they made them work hard, work long hours. And let me just get rid of that. And the whole thing, as I say, was, I suppose, bullying, for what you call it these, trying to break them. So the treadmill arrived in 1835, and housing the building, as I say, next to the turnkey, which you saw in a minute ago. So they could see the prisoners from the road, you can see their backs, and it's like a kind of paddle steamer, if you're kind of familiar with the idea of a kind of paddle steamer. And so you couldn't see your neighbour because there's a wooden screen in between you. And the wheel went on continuously, and the resistance could be set. So a bit like in the gym there, you could set a different kind of resistance by the warders. They could decide how much hard work they wanted to make this. And prisoners were made to work on the treadmill for periods of 20 minutes at a time. Then they'd have a rest for 10 minutes and then resume and carry on until they completed their kind of stipulated labour of ascent, as it was called, which varied from prisoner to prisoner. So the ascent being essentially they were climbing a hill, and the authorities would decide based on the sentence, conduct and so forth, and the nature of the offender, presumably different between men and women, of how far they would ascend on any given day. So the maximum ascent for a man was 12,000 feet per day and 10,000 feet for a woman. But in 1859, these regulations changed, and from that point onwards, no female or prisoners or children under 14 could be sentenced to the treadmill. And there was a famous prisoner here bought a treadmill in the lockdown. A chartist, talk about chartists one day, we'll go to Bradford and talk about chartists. But basically, they held a kind of a rebellion, if you like, and they were captured, and the chap called Robert Peddy was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment in 1840 for his involvement in the Chartist Rising in Bradford. And he came here, but he wrote later about life on the treadmill, in which he described the effects as he suffered hot sweats, headaches, nausea, vomiting, and giddiness. So it's kind of like the workout from hell. It was a really harsh punishment. The only kind of positive, if you like, can you say positive, was that they were given sort of slightly more rations, insofar as to quite clearly you're sort of burning that much energy, you'd need more food. But I mean, that was basically all that kind of going for it. And in many prisons, as I say, they had no purpose whatsoever. It was literally purely futile. It wasn't even like driving a turbine or electricity or anything. It was simply just to kind of drive them mad. I mean, in others, they would sit and pick sacks apart. They call it picking oakum. Like kind of sat, and literally, when it was all finished, they'd sweep it away, throw it away, and you'd start again. Utterly futile labour. They just kind of keep you going all day long. So there was no education, no rehabilitation. It was simply punishment, humiliation, demeaning you, making you feel in pain. And it really was an incredibly nasty setup for the prisoners here in Beverley. But as I say, they at least had, I suppose, some degree of satisfaction, however minimal, that their efforts were smashing up chalk to be used elsewhere in kind of chalk powder. But, you know, essentially, you could have done that in many other ways. You didn't really need to. So, given that sort of the punishment meted out here was so tough, it's kind of difficult to understand why so many would flee here for sanctuary. But this was a place of holy sanctuary where even those that were facing the gallows could become untouchable, at least for a time. In fact, in the medieval period, everyone was entitled to seek the sanctuary of St John. And it's believed that a sanctuary marker stone was somewhere kind of around this area, Molescroft Lane, in the medieval period, to demonstrate that anybody fleeing a charge was now within 2 miles of Beverley Minster and could claim sanctuary. And there is a surviving sanctuary stone at a place called Walkington, which is the south of Beverley. I'll see if I've got a picture of that. And it gives us an idea of what the stone here would have looked like. Now, again, I'm sorry about that, it hasn't added. But anyway, if you pick a standing sort of stone, would have been here. As I say, the idea was simply to mark out the fact that you had arrived within the scope now of the place of sanctuary. Now, many sanctuaries were just literally, so Westminster Sanctuary is a good example of that, where if you get hold of the door of the of Westminster Abbey, you could claim sanctuary. Whereas actually here in Beverley, it was 2 miles around the town, so much bigger. And what's interesting is that the importance of reaching the sanctuary stone was underlined by a series of gritty discoveries in the 1960s in the Walkington area. An archaeological dig near Walkington revealed the evidence of a burial site for victims of execution. And despite evidence of much earlier settlement going back to the Neolithic, or the Stone Age era, the skeletons found all dated from the early medieval period. And all 11 were found decapitated and their heads were found nearby. So, the reason, by the way, that they know that these were executed and Christian rather than Roman, not later, was that pre-Christian there was no differentiation between convicted felons being buried and regular people. Whereas after Christianity became, if you like, the dominant culture, we began to separate out, you know, the convicted felons and murderers. So consequently, we know this happened in the Christian era. And so finding these 12 headless skeletons with their heads tucked very nearby tells us it was an execution pit. So that was a good incentive to reach the sanctuary. So how did the cult of St John come to have the power of sanctuary? Well, it's mainly because he was credited with establishing Beverley. Now, we know a good amount about the life of St John through the writings of his student, a chap called the Venerable Bede, who wrote the first kind of meaningful history of England. And John had been a member, so St John had been a member of the Whitby community. So he was a monk in Whitby, at Whitby Abbey, that we've been visited to. So the Abbess Hilda was the overseer, you probably remember, of that community. So he was part of that community. He then became the Bishop of York between the years 705 and 714 AD. And it was during his time in York that he decided to establish a monastery. And he decided that it should be here. According to Bede, he found a secluded site in the wood of the Men of Deira, which is the old name for the East Yorkshire. And archaeology kind of supports the view that the monastery was probably on the site of the present Minster, where we're heading towards on this tour. Beverley, by the way, means beaver stream. As we go through the town, you'll see the crest, and it features a beaver. At that time, those beavers pretty plentiful in this part of the world, and you know, the little animals that chew through trees and stuff, make dams. And so Beverley was basically beaver stream or beaver, valley, meadow. So that's where the name comes from, Beverley. So John retired to the monastery in 714. He gave up being Bishop of York. He came here to live in his monastery, and he died here in the year of 721. And he was buried there in the chapel of St Peter. And Bede tells us quite specifically that John was blessed with the gift of healing, particularly when it came to those you call sort of deaf and dumb. You know, people with hearing and speech impediments is probably a better way of putting it these days, isn't it? And lots of accounts of miracles, of healing children, curing the sick. Now, across the world, there were kind of many places where saints were buried, revered, where they get pilgrims coming. And one way of venerating these saints, as I say, is to come on a pilgrimage and to come, pray, with the saints and ask for their special kind of, assistance, if you like, and help in matters. So Beverley became such a place. It became a real focal point for pilgrimage in the medieval era. And it grew particularly in the early medieval era, thanks to a chap called King Athelstan, who quite possibly was the first king of all England. We're not entirely sure when England sort of comes into being as a sort of new nation, because obviously England arises really as a kind of a point of resistance to the Viking raids. So it's not really kind of a country as such. It obviously comes from the Anglo-Saxons, Angles. But Athelstan, we think, was the son of Edward the Elder, probably the first king of all England. He came here to Beverley, prayed at the shrine of St John. He was travelling north, and he heard the kind of reputation, and he was about to go and face the Vikings in battle. So he prays for an intercession. He is he's looking for assistance, divine help with the battle, ahead of the Battle of Brunanburh. And he goes, succeeds, strikes a real kind of meaningful victory against the Vikings. And as a result of that, he rewards the town of Beverley, in doing so paying tribute, of course, to St John. And part of this is provide this right of sanctuary. So that's how it's created, this right of sanctuary, whereby any fugitive can flee from the law and get protection here, is established around about the middle of the 10th century. So we've been walking down Millscroft Road. We're about to head now through the North Bar and actually into the sort of medieval town. I hope you've enjoyed, hello Natalie, the buildings thus far. We are obviously been enjoying some splendid Georgian architecture. Once we're going to pass through, we'll be seeing a good deal more of the kind of older. But I mean, it's such a beautiful, characterful town. As I say, it's strange that it has this underbelly, but as I say, this creating of sanctuary, which meant that fugitives from the law, whatever they'd done, mostly murder to be fair, could come here and have a chance of starting afresh and starting a new life, was always going to give this a unique edge. So North Bar, this kind of brick-built bar right in the centre of our kind of pitch here, not at all dissimilar to one of York's bars, is the way we kind of pass into the town. See, in the early medieval period, Beverley was not walled. There are records indicating that bars had been built in the 12th and the 13th centuries. But North Bar is the only kind of survivor, and it dates from 1409. So we want to cross over. Oh, let's go with the greens on. And of course, unlike York, it's brick built, or tile as it was known in those days. In the sort of medieval period, they didn't call them bricks, they called them tiles. They were tilers rather than bricklayers. So it looks distinctively different to York's gateway, but essentially it has identical purpose. Controlling access, providing security, providing a passage where taxation and tolls can be received. So I'm just going to pull in here, let these folk go past, and give you a sense of that. So it was built in 1409 and renovated then in the 17th century. Now, I mentioned earlier the first of the stones in this direction, the sanctuary stones, was about a mile or so down the road from where we are now. But progressively, the closer you got to the minster, the more your level of protection increased. So once a fugitive passed through the North Bar, the sanctuary protection grew stronger. And sanctuary rights already granted by the reaching of the stone, the closer you got to the minster, these rights kind of increased. So as I say, most places of sanctuary, it was simply the area immediately around. Sometimes just the doorway of an abbey, sometimes a precinct of the abbey. But Beverley, unusually, it's 2 miles in every direction. So this is a very, very large kind of landmass, particularly in the kind of medieval era. It covers a great deal of land and a large number of people. So anyone seizing a fugitive, by the way, so if you thought, oh, I'm going to catch this person, because a real feature of medieval life, of course, with fugitives, was that actually the danger wasn't from the authorities so much, because actually law enforcement was kind of modest. There was no police force. The courts were really quite limited in their powers. It was much more likely to be the victims or the families of the victims that would get hold of the perpetrators and look to do them harm, an eye for an eye and all that. So consequently, much of being a fugitive was about fleeing those that had been wronged rather than necessarily just the authorities themselves. So consequently, once somebody was within sanctuary, what that meant was that fines could be laid upon anybody that laid hands on a fugitive. And these would gradually increase the closer you got to the minster. And also you could have the threat of excommunication. So consequently, you could be sent, in effect, your life is nullified because you're going to be sent to hell if you sort of further persist in trying to chase after this fugitive. So the church were putting very, very heavy penalties on people to enable fugitives to escape from criminal justice, which seems sort of most bizarre right now. But there we go. That's history for you. And if a fugitive got all the way to the altar and then was taken, his captors would be sentenced to death. So I mean, that's how serious sanctuary was taken. It was a profound responsibility to aid a fugitive. Once they claimed the sanctuary, they were basically free to come and go as they pleased within the rules of sanctuary. So murder was the most common crime amongst those seeking sanctuary in the town. Sanctuary seekers were initially given 30 days to stay in the town free from pursuit. And in this time, the canons of Beverley Minster negotiated with the pursuers and investigated the accusations. Now, so the Beverley canons, so in other words, they're going to senior churchmen, they would decide whether there was sufficient sort of prima facie evidence for a case to be answered. And if it was proved inconclusive, or they felt there was insufficient, then the accused were escorted to the sanctuary limits. So consequently, they were kind of free to go. If the churchman said, no, there isn't a case to answer here, that was it. But even if they said there was, those that were fleeing could return again and seek sanctuary again. And believe it or not, they could do this 3 times. And if, after the 3rd time, it was still felt that there was a case to answer, but they preferred to stay in Beverley rather than to face justice, which is not surprising. Basically, many of them will face execution. They could stay here and they could work for the sanctuary of St John, as well as called Girthman. We'll come back to talk about it in a minute. But to look at this magnificent pump. Isn't that absolutely beautiful? So water pump, town pump, of course, before people had running water in their homes. But how delightful and elaborate is that? This was a very, very wealthy village. Oh, it still is a wealthy town. But isn't that quite something? So these guys that had, if you like, escaped the penalty for murder, named as Girthman, who then worked for the sanctuary, swore an allegiance to St John. They were forbidden to carry weapons, but above that, they kind of, hello everybody, I'm new here. Hello, Christopher Withers. You're most welcome to join us. And hopefully it'll make sense. Join in the chat and say hi to Christopher and come back, subscribe, all those things, and before you know it, you'll have a whole bunch of new friends. So many of them were then attached to the 2 churches, the Minster and its kind of daughter church here, which is the fabulous St Mary's Church, one of the finest medieval churches anywhere in England. And this church was first founded in the first half of the 12th century as a kind of daughter church of Beverley Minster to serve Beverley's trading community. So Beverley's economy was booming as a wool town. And the wealth is reflected in the fine arches. So let's have a nice walk around this church because it really is quite good. This is not the Minster, by the way, in case you're thinking we're already arrived at the Minster. This isn't the Minster. It's a smaller version. It's every bit as spectacular. But what it actually brings to mind is, for those who remember when we've been to the wool towns of Suffolk, when I go on my annual pilgrimage down to see a family in Suffolk, and places like Lavenham and Kelsey, we see these big wool churches. It's very similar to that. And that's because Beverley was also a wool church. So consequently, what you're seeing is the grandeur reflecting the wealth of the merchant of the city. In other words, lots of money is being given over to build the church and to fit it out to reflect the splendour, the grandeur, the wealth, the importance. Beverley was in the top 12 towns of wealth in the UK at the time, and so consequently, it's kind of built that. And they started this building in the 12th century, and then really from the back end of the 13th century, there's a massive kind of period of extension, of kind of rebuilding, which is only interrupted by the Black Death Of course, that happened everywhere, really. The Black Death in the middle of the 14th century brought works to an end. But as soon as they were able to access the labour, the money started coming back in, they continued. So this is an incredibly large sort of parish church. Hi, Roland. Just have a sip of water. Who's been to Beverley by then? I'm suspecting Julie's probably been, so do let me know if you've been to Beverley and if you've been inside this church, because it is absolutely fab. Next time we come, I'm going to try and get us inside. So that's something to look forward to. If not, I'll come and do some video and we'll kind of share that. But today we'll just have a look at the exterior as we're going to walk around. So from the time of Beverley's charter in 1359, there was 12 keepers of the town, and they were elected from the merchant body. And they're responsible for upholding the ancient laws and customs, but also punishing wrongdoers and rebels. So, you know, you kind of got a civic, the early merchant, what you might call, is going to become a civic council if you like, a group of men that are appointed to keep the peace. But the kind of unique nature of the sanctuary provisions must have made for an unusual community, since the least likely to have to demonstrate their innocence, and thus more likely to be guilty, would have stayed here. So in this relatively small community, you've got many murderers and serious criminals living in Beverley in the service of the church. Which really is kind of strange when you think about it. So the sanctuary drew men and occasionally women from all over England. And details survive from the year 1478 to 1499, when 132 refugees, so across 20 years, 132 fugitives were recorded entering sanctuary here. And the reasons that they listed, over 100 of those was homicide, compared to 20 for debt. So, you know, assuming that that is broadly sort of representative of the earlier periods as well, you've got basically, you know, dozens of murderers arriving here to make a home in Beverley, which is quite strange. I can't think of anywhere else that you could say that the population would comprise such a high number of murderers. So the kind of use of the sanctuary as a kind of recruiting ground for the Scottish Wars was quite common. Look at this for a doorway here. Isn't this fab? Lovely grotesques. That's it, they're all criminals. Look at that. It's a wonderful kind of bestiary kind of going on. So Edward I was aware of this kind of community of, I'd like to say, violent people, violent offenders. And so he drew soldiers for the Scottish War in 1303, offered a pardon to men in the sanctuary who joined the army. And all the ones that joined up were guilty of murder. Most from the East Riding, one from Whitby, so we've got one Whitby murderer within that. But everyone's quite open about this. And so in spite of kind of people sort of not being very happy about this, it continued onwards. Edward Blisle, who had the Blisle College in Oxford named after him, who was basically a Scotsman that fought with the English to try and keep Scotland under the power of the English, rather than kind of Robert the Bruce on the other side. He recruited here in the 1340s. So, I don't know if the signal dropped down here, but it's a bit funky. So, you know, they just kind of knew that the men of Beverley were a violent lot, or at least contained this community, this cohort of seriously violent people that might be wearing the robes of the church, but really sort of unreconstructed violent offenders, kind of living in the community. And so it was a good place to come if you wanted men that would come and do pretty hardcore things on the battlefield. This was a great place to come, because you were going to find men that had already been proven that they had the wherewithal, the guts, the malice, whatever, the dark character to commit acts of murder. So there we go. So it provided a jolly useful supply of troops to the, look at these butchers here, isn't it amazing? To the English crown. So you just sort of see walking around this, the kind of the sheer size of this church, this parish church. This is not, as I say, the minster, or the minster a little bit later on, but it gives you just a sense of the wealth and the grandeur that was available here. But as I say, you've got this kind of volatile element within the urban society, and it leads famously to an unrest here in the year of 1381. A chap called Henry Newark, who himself was a sanctuary man, so again, somebody who'd escaped crime of murder and fled here, was now involved as one of the town leaders. And in 1381, a petition to King Richard II from the town leaders of Beverley complained that rioters and troublemakers, including Henry Newark, had taken control of the town government of Beverley. And they tried to break a political monopoly and private profiteering by removing the 12 keepers. So the 12 men that had been installed by the great and the good were replaced by, basically, a bunch of violent criminals. And it instilled within them a fear, they said, that they dare not approach the town for fear of death, and asked the king not to execute large financial bonds exacted from them by the threats of violence. So consequently, they were appealing to the king and saying they were scared for their lives because the likes of Henry Newark and these unconvicted felons, but men of violence, had taken control of the town. And Richard orders the Sheriff of Yorkshire to arrest Richard Boston and the two former chamberlains of Beverley, Henry Newark, Thomas White. But the sheriff returns and he can't find them. Maybe people are protecting them, they won't give them up. So the sheriff returns kind of empty-handed. So now another writ is sent, this time to the Archbishop of York, to lay hands on Henry Newark and the two others. But they come and try and discharge that writ, but in doing so they kind of really put up the backs of the Beverley canons because it feels that the Archbishop is overstepping his kind of powers in this respect. And they were very happy, Henry Newark and others were very happy to stoke this tension. And bearing in mind this only happens a few months before the Peasants' Revolt, and these guys are very heavily involved, it does suggest that a major kind of spark and cause of the Peasants' Revolt, which we know started on the eastern side of the country, was by these people that had assumed positions of power, but actually had done so through Beverley, where they had escaped from the consequences of their crimes. So it is an absolutely remarkable bit of English history that I wasn't really that aware of until recently. So there we go. So those kind of instigators exploit the tensions in Beverley between the Minster and the church canons, and in doing so they kind of bring to mind ideas of whatever else might be unhappy with, particularly taxation and so forth, which becomes the leading cause of the Peasants' Revolt. So there we go. Now then, another leading criminal in this area, and we're all about criminals today. The hotel you're looking at here, the Beverley Arms Hotel, was a place where Dick Turpin frequently stayed. So Dick Turpin, if we recall from our York stories, started off as a poacher, then a member of a violent gang, the Gregory gang down in Essex, breaking into houses, assaulting people, murdering them, doing all sorts of horrible, nasty things. Ultimately a highwayman, but then it gets too hot for him. He's England's most wanted man. He leaves the road and he takes, he hides in Epping Forest, but unfortunately discovered by a gatekeeper there, and he shoots him. And then there's a king's ransom is put on his head, £200 reward, and any felon can be excused of any crime if they hand over Dick Turpin. So he heads up here, and he moves to York, or in the area of York, Brough, and he presents himself as a chap by the name of John Palmer. He is now a horse dealer, and he tells the rich of York that he can supply horses that can outrun Dick Turpin, which is fantastic, right? So he comes to Lincolnshire to steal horses. So East Yorkshire, on the edge of Lincolnshire. So he comes over here to steal, he goes back to York to sell. So when he's on these kind of stealing missions, or in between the two, this is where he stays. This is kind of regular staging post in York and Lincolnshire. It was a successful sort of coaching in. So it's kind of ironic it was frequently the home of Dick Turpin, the scourge of coachmen, as a feared highwayman. We're going to talk a bit more about him later on, but let's walk on down into the town. Interesting name for a street. Hengate. Is that what you were talking about there? Now, what was the reference to Lewis Carroll, Fran? I didn't pick that up, so do let me know. Other than being somebody that probably got away with crime, but let's not go there. Yeah, Hengate, I love that name. So we're in Hengate. Gosh, time's going on already. So we're coming into Saturday Market, and so what's kind of ironic actually is that there was no kind of police here. So actually, the likes of Dick Turpin didn't really need to kind of worry about being apprehended in court. In 1685, a charter was granted to Beverley Corporation so they could make their own laws of government and to punish offenders and to charge fines. But because there's no police force to enforce it, it's kind of difficult. In the 17th century, you got watchmen who were employed in times of danger. And in the 18th and 19th centuries, the corporation rewarded individuals who gave assistance in the apprehension of felons. There were parish constables, and they were elected annually. However, they received no other pay, just got rewards, gratuities, and minor fees, so tips basically. And so the office was very unpopular and very strongly associated with bribery. That these people were often in association with publicans and kind of wrongdoers. So the constables were not held in kind of high regard. So the Saturday market has been in place since the medieval period. And the market cross, if I just pan us around here, it is glorious, Catherine, yeah. The market cross in front of us there. So I talk about the town Christmas. Oh, here, Bjorn. I mentioned earlier about it being Beverley, Beverley, Beaver Stream, Beaver Meadow. So this is the crest of the town there, as you can see. The beaver by the stream. So there you go. So Beverley, Beaver Stream. And we believe that name was chosen by St John himself, of course. So it's still this day, on Saturdays, so yesterday, this area would been thronging with people. We were in the kind of market square. And been noticed for centuries gone. And it was a place of very public forms of punishment. There was a place of confinement referred to as a kidcut, which is a term used around here to mean prison. Not quite sure exactly where it was, but somewhere in this kind of square. And it was located here. The earliest reference we got to it is in 1519. And also they established a pillory in the square. So a pillory house was located very near to where the cross is now. So that's where the stocks and the pillories were put together. They were sort of stored when they weren't kind of in use. Be brought out on kind of market days. So I've got an image of a pillory. I'm sure you'll have recognise the pillory. So obviously it's a modern photo. It gives you an idea. It's being attached there by the neck and the hands. So you kind of stood up. By contrast, the stocks, you're sitting down, you kind of legs in them. I've actually got a picture of the stocks from this area. So pillory, standing up, stocks sitting down. That's the kind of principal difference there. And it is glorious, isn't it, the market square front? I absolutely love the cross. It is quite something. Just going to pan up to the top. And I'll give it, come around the other side. You see the crests on there? So being in the stocks or the pillory was very, very uncomfortable, obviously. And the crowd often threw rotten fruits and eggs, sometimes even bricks and stones. So it was that, shaming really. Like today, internet shaming. Shaming has always been a kind of very important part of the criminal justice system. So, being seen to be kind of punished for your crimes was kind of important. So some lovely crests up here. I'm afraid I don't know what the crests relate to. So that's my bad as a guide, I should know that, but I just don't happen to know. Bring back the stocks, says Dawn. So Dawn obviously is a firm believer in kind of public punishment, but it was pretty shabby. And often we do it on market day, so the maximum number of people would kind of be would sort of see, if you like, you could take part. And the pillory was often used as kind of part of a more severe punishment. It's often a prelude to a punishment. So, for instance, a chap called William Chambers, a labourer, was due for a whipping in January of 1730 because he'd been found guilty of stealing a yellow rabbit skin from the warren at Hunmanby. Unfortunately, it was the property of Justice of the Peace, so he was treated very harshly, pretty sure. The rabbit presumably got justice as well. But before his whipping, he spent time in the pillory here. In 1811, Samuel Burnett was published a booklet with illustrations considered to be obscene, filthy, indecent and impure. In other words, an adult education, adult book, right? And he was sent to spend a month in the jail, but also he spent 2 hours in the stocks. So this idea that you could be both, humiliated and then punished was definitely the kind of way. In market rules, so obviously there's market stalls around here, often carried a sentence of time in the pillory. If meat was not sold at the agreed price, you could be put in the pillory. If you got caught a second time, you could be whipping. By a third time, a £40 fine and the loss of an ear. So these punishments really were incredibly. Oh, Lewis Carroll visited. Thank you. These were, very, very kind of stringent punishments. So stocks are first mentioned in 1557. There's a lovely picture that I think I've got on here of a local guy in the stocks, looking really rather fed up, and the other chap there seems to be goading with it, really, isn't he? It doesn't appear to be terribly sympathetic to that chap's plight, but there you go. That's the whole idea of the stocks and these kind of punishments, that you're there to be laughed at, and not really have a nice time in any kind of sense of the word. So it's just tough, was the view. In 1735, the corporation ordered new stocks to be set up. So they obviously felt they were sort of going so well, they needed some more. And one set was kept at the Pillory Market, which is down here in the Saturday Market, just down here. And they were brought out for the Wednesday Market if there was a particular sort of backlog of people that needed to humiliate. They could come out on the Wednesdays as well. So consequently, it was a roaring trade was putting people in stocks. So stocks and pillories were used to kind of punish a wide range of minor offences, such as drunkenness, prostitution, and even not attending church. So you could be put in the stocks for avoiding communion, which of course was jolly useful at the time when they were trying to identify Catholics. So it could be another reason why you'd humiliate people because of religious differences. But it's a very common practice. So we're going to walk on now through Toll Gavel. There's another jail just down here. Really, for a small town, you won't believe how many jails were here in history. Toll Gavel is a place where we need toll going through. So another form of punishment through public shaming was practiced here in Beverley until the late 19th century. And it was called riding the stange, not strange, stange, S-T-A-N-G-E. And the ceremony was performed when a husband was known to have been beating his wife. So against in shaming. So in the evening, a large number of young men, often accompanied by a crowd of children, would gather outside the offender's door with kettles, pans, horns and whistles and other noisy instruments, and make as much noise as possible. They'd be carrying on their shoulders a ladder, and one person would be sat in the middle of this ladder. So, at the top, above the crowd. And he's kind of shouting the loudest, and he's leading a rhyme, a song would have been written about the transgressions, the crime of this man in beating his wife, his partner, whomsoever, children maybe. And he'd be singing this at the top of his voice, and they'd be sort of doing a cacophony of kind of beats and rhythms and so forth. This would get louder and louder. And of course, what it was doing was drawing attention to everybody in the neighbourhood that in this house lived a man that was a violent abuser of his wife, children, and his family. He was just a domestic abuser. So again, you're using kind of shame to kind of address this. It's obviously community sort of justice, isn't it, rather than kind of official justice. So after this had kind of been shouted several times, the procession moved around the town to make sure that everybody in the town was aware of what this kind of guy was up to. So consequently, you've got a kind of big sort of notoriety. And it was repeated for sort of several nights, and generally this was enough to kind of get the message home, really, after kind of several nights of kind of public humiliation. They tend to be a bit kind to their kind of partners. But if they weren't, it'd kind of start again, and it'd get more violent and more noisy. So consequently, this was a way of trying to keep a lid on kind of domestic violence, which is obviously a good thing. So the most serious crimes were heard at the quarter sessions at the court just around the corner. And the sessions were held, the highest courts in East Riding. They heard cases 4 times a year, so quarter a year, in January, April, July, October, from all over the East Riding. And they dated back to 1363. So the local justice of the peace met with the jury, and they heard a variety of cases. They called witnesses, so things like theft, assault and battery, poaching, or common offences. They didn't try capital offences, so murder charges, etc., or treason. They would have been sent to the assize courts at York. And offenders with previous convictions were often given very, very severe punishments. For example, sentences of 10, 6 and 4 years were given for stealing fowl, and so birds, other way. And from about 1703, the sessions were held here in the Guildhall. So come around this corner, you'll see in just one moment where are we? Sessions. Well, let me make sure you're in the right place. I think I am. Yes, I am. Down Register Square. That's in the Guildhall. And the Guildhall dates to the medieval period, but what you'll see in a minute, it's got a frontage that was added during the early part of the 19th century, which gives it, again, this look of being a kind of Georgian building. It's very late Georgian. But actually the building behind it is medieval. And this was the courtroom, this building here, and next door to the prison. And one of the most notorious felons to appear here in court was Dick Turpin. So as we know, Turpin was operating in this area, frequently staying in Beverley as an outwardly respectable horse dealer by the name of John Palmer. However, this was about to change. On the 2nd of October 1738, he awoke at an inn in Brough in East Yorkshire, and it said that a cockerel's crow awoke him. In a fit of temper, he takes out a pistol and shoots the bird. He's a hothead, right? Instead of just turning over and putting the pillow over his head, he shoots it. Now, unfortunately, this bird is a prize gamecock, and it belongs to the local landowner. And so Turpin is rebuked by a chap called John Robinson, the steward to the Lord of the Manor. And Turpin then threatens to shoot him also. So, you know, he can't leave it alone, Turpin. So John Robinson reports what's gone on. And of course, there's no police force. But 3 justices of the peace travelled to Brough and took written depositions about the incident. And having considered the case, they intended to bind him over, in other words, to be bound over to keep the peace. But Turpin refused to pay the required surety. Now, had he paid, Turpin would have been a free man. Instead, he was committed to the House of Correction at Beverley. So Turpin was escorted to Beverley by the parish constable, Carey Gill. Apparently, he made no attempt at escape, and it's been suggested that Turpin may have been depressed about the failures in his life. Now, the clerk of the peace for East Riding, whose details kind of account for the story we can tell you, later reported that the 3 JPs made inquiries as to how Palmer had made his money, suspecting that his lifestyle was funded by criminal activities. So Turpin appeared by the magistrates, in front of the magistrates here, in the courtroom. I've got a picture of it, I think, inside, and have we got a picture of this? Yeah, here we are. So this is largely unchanged from the time when Dick Turpin would have seen it. That's just at the top, the jury sat in the middle. You're looking at the dock. Isn't that beautiful? So Turpin claimed he was a butcher who had fallen into debt, and he'd left his home in Long Sutton in Lincolnshire. So they then contacted the Justice of the Peace in Long Sutton, and they confirmed that John Palmer had lived there for about 9 months, but was suspected of stealing sheep and had escaped the custody of the local constable. He also suspected Palmer was a horse thief and had taken several depositions supporting his view. So he told the 3 JPs they prefer him to be detained. So the original House of Correction, House of Correction. So before, as we saw the one up on New Walk, beginning of the tour. So it was here. It was right next to the Guildhall. So this building here was the original prison. Again, much changed over the years, but this was the location of the prison. But the view was of the magistrates that the case against John Palmer, or Dick Turpin as we know him, of course, was sort of too serious for him to remain here at the House of Correction, and they demanded sureties for him to appear at York Assizes. So the surety is basically like bail bonds for those that in kind of over the Atlantic. You know, you'll be familiar with. You know, you're going to bailed with a certain amount of money to appear, and if you don't appear, you'll forfeit that money and a warrant is out for your arrest. But again, he refuses to pay. So on the 16th of October, Dick Turpin was transferred to York Castle in handcuffs. And as you know, he was executed 6 months later in April 1739 in York. But on 2 occasions, he could have simply paid his way to get out of trouble, disappeared, and carried on his crimes. But oddly, he seems strangely subdued at his time here in Beverley, and he's resigned to his fate, and he kind of accepts it, which is kind of odd, but there you go. So the House of Correction was located here in Register Square from around 1611 to 1809. It had 14 cells for petty criminals serving short sentences, and it was also used for corporal punishment and for the employment of the work-shy. So, yeah, definitely, I think, Susan, it wouldn't have seemed quite so glamorous to the criminals appearing there, particularly if you're going to get a flogging for your trouble. So the House of Corrections appeared first under the Elizabethan Poor Law of 1601, and they were designed to correct those unwilling to work. Now, in truth, only the rich could have chosen not to work, and so these House of Corrections were really, in fact, held beggars and vagrants who'd been there to be put to work. So there we go. There is the Guildhall, and again, next time we come, we'll try and get inside the Guildhall, and we'll do some more about general history, but today, as I say, we're talking about crime and punishment. So this is obviously we're in the sort of the governance quarter now as well. There's lovely buildings around here, kind of town hall and so forth, so the council buildings. But isn't it absolutely glorious? And just here, Register Square, another murder took place. In October 1857, a chap called Henry Baker, who was a gardener at the registrar's house, so the house that was there, basically, in front of you there. He murdered his sweetheart, Helen Hatfield. She was a housemaid, in a fit of jealousy and passion. We think probably another man was involved somewhere along the line. and he attempted, after he killed her, to cut his own throat. So after an argument, Helen's throat was slit from ear to ear on the pathway. So here we are, leaving 3 trails of blood. And blood was smeared over the hedge. Now, obviously, it's just pavement now. There's no garden to see because it's been built and developed on this side of the road. But cuts on her hands indicated she'd struggled with Baker, suggesting it was not a double suicide. So Helen was then apparently dragged to where she was then later found, with Baker lying sort of close by. But he was still alive. He cut his own throat. So he was taken to the house and later to his own house in Well Lane, which is just around the corner. And Well Lane, by the way, was also the location of a ducking stool. So in case we haven't mentioned enough forms of punishment, our friend the ducking stool was in use in Well Lane. That's just around the corner from where we are now. And he died of his wounds a few days later. But they tried to keep him alive. They wanted him to face trial. So they tried to keep him alive, but it's said that every time they tried to feed him, the food simply came out of his cut throat, which isn't very nice, is it? Not very savoury. But there we go. So here's the town hall now. So the seat of local government here in Beverley. Isn't it beautiful? So during the kind of 19th century, kind of steady levels of crime increased in Britain, which led to the introduction of kind of really severe penalties. We've talked about before, the Black Code, the Bloody Act, which basically at its worst, there was 300 separate offences that you could be sent for capital punishment. Things from obviously the obvious, murder, theft, rape, etc., violence, but also arson, impersonation, forgery, coin clipping, kind of not paying your taxes, you name it. I mean, it was just on and on and on. They just kept adding and adding, poaching. The idea being that they didn't really have any kind of law enforcement, and they believed that actually employing police was going to restrict the civil liberties of the rich. You didn't want people being sort of spied upon by a standing police force. So consequently, you took your chances with law and order. Hue and cry was used, of course, so if a felon was seen, a witness committing a crime, a hue and cry could go up, which basically was calling after people to sort of chase and give pursuit. Of course, it often meant that people were incorrectly identified, wrongly accused, and so forth. But that was it. I mean, there was no police force, no kind of criminal justice. So they tried to kind of bring in really nasty penalties. And when they realised that hanging people was sort of counterproductive and it put society, it put people against society, they tried transportation to the colonies. Obviously, Australia was the first, the Americas were the first, but then eventually Australia became the place. And so people believed that being sent to Australia as an alternative to the death penalty was appropriate punishment for less severe criminals. And of course, it also had the added benefit of removing the criminals from Britain. So a sentence of transportation could be imposed for cases that would seem quite trivial today. For example, in 1760, William Mills of Cherry Burton, very near here, was transported for 7 years for stealing a petticoat. Now, in theory, transportation was only for a limited period, but few ever returned home. One that did, however, was a notorious felon by the name of Snowden Dunhill. Now, Snowden Dunhill was infamous in East Riding during the early 19th century, and the publication of the autobiography, The Life of Snowden Dunhill, ensured that his fame extended beyond his own lifetime. In other words, he was so proud of his exploits as a criminal, he wrote his own story. So he was born in 1766, and he was a farm servant in a place called Spaltingdon until his marriage to Sarah Taylor. And then he worked intermittently as a labourer. Now, he'd always been involved in petty crime, petty theft, and he attributed his descent into dark criminal ways of life once he became, sorry, let's plug on fire. Yeah, he blamed his wife, basically, who was the widow of a man who'd been shot whilst carrying out a crime. So basically he was saying that, if it had just him, he'd have kind of stuck at theft. But his wife kind of introduced him to ideas of violent crime. So he took that route. So Sarah had 3 surviving children from her previous marriage and 3 more with Snowden. So although they were occasionally involved in burglary, Snowden specialised in the theft of grain from farmers. That was his kind of modus operandi. And his collaboration with a number of millers enabled his thefts to be undiscovered for a number of years. So consequently, inside jobs. allowed him to prosper and eventually to gain a reputation as the head of a dangerous gang. And he avoided capture for many years, despite being convicted of minor offences at the Beverley Quarter Sessions. So in 1800, he was convicted for selling ale in Spaldington without a licence. He was fined 40 shillings. 1807 for using a greyhound to destroy game at home on Spalding Moor, fined £5. Now eventually, Snowdon Dunhill was captured as a result of stealing wheat from a granary at home on Spalding Moor. He was taken to Beverley House of Corrections. He elected to be tried in York at the Assizes in March 1813 rather than Beverley, because he felt he was too well known in the East Riding to actually ever get himself a fair trial. He was found guilty and sentenced to be transported for 7 years. Now, in fact, he was taken to the hulks on the Thames at Woolwich, where he spent 6 years before returning home. So the hulks were, I think they were the dredgers, if I'm right saying that. Natalie may know who's on. They were the kind of the dredgers. On another tour, we'll talk about Mary Wollstonecraft, by the way, mother of Mary Shelley. She's spent a good deal of time here. And so in the meantime, so he's away for 6 years. In the meantime, the rest of his family, this criminal enterprise, continued to be a nuisance to society. Now, although Snowdon had evaded transportation himself, he returned to find that most of his family had actually been transported. His wife Sarah, his daughter Rosanna, were tried at Beverley in 1819 for stealing 2 geese. Sarah was transported for 7 years, and Rosanna, being pregnant, was sentenced to 2 years at York Castle, although she was later transported for stealing 2 pieces of gauze ribbon. His stepdaughter Sarah was tried at Beverley Quarter Sessions in 1828 for pickpocketing at the town's fair, and sentenced to 7 years transportation. Snowdon's 2 sons and stepson were also sent to Australia. Only one of the children, his stepdaughter Elizabeth Taylor, escaped transportation. So on his return from the hulks, Snowdon resumed his old ways, stating that it was through loneliness that he returned to his life of crime, this time stealing on both sides of the Humber. Eventually he was tried in 1823 for stealing cloth from a draper at Brigg. This time he was transported to Tasmania for 7 years and was eventually reunited with his wife in Hobart. So he died in prison in Port Arthur in 1838. His wife Sarah died the same year. Now, transportation was finally stopped in 1867 due to pressure from the colonies and the expense of transporting people who were also questioning whether it was effective in deterring others from committing similar crimes. So between 1788 and 1868, the British government transported over 160,000 convicts from Britain and Ireland to the Australian colonies. It's been described as a kind of concerted attempt to rid the British Isles of its criminal class. More than 850 of those transported were sentenced here in the courts of Hull and the East Riding of Yorkshire. So it really couldn't have been any further from the spirit of St John's Sanctuary, which of course was located in the Minster, which we're now coming into. Chris, you mentioned Christmas. I'm thinking about coming back at Christmas for the Christmas fair, actually. There's a very, very good Christmas fair here, so I think we'll come at Christmas and we'll do other bits of their history. So St John, we've talked about, died in the year 721. And the embryonic monastery kind of set up by John in the 8th century grew into a large community. So John's sainthood was not formally recognised until 1037. Nevertheless, his reputation attracted large numbers of pilgrims who provided the finance for more substantial buildings. And in the early 12th century, a start was made on a stone building in the new Romanesque style. Now, disaster struck in 1188 when the church, and indeed much of Beverley, was ravaged by fire. No time was lost, and about 1190, 2 years later, a new building in the Gothic style was begun. And this survives today in the eastern part of Beverley Minster. So Beverley became a town offering hospitality to pilgrims coming to worship at the shrine of St John. By 1377, it was intensely rich through the wool and cloth trade, and it was listed the top 12 largest towns of England. And of course, it was a place of sanctuary for fugitives. So who were the fugitives that fled to Beverley? Sanctuary seekers came from all walks of life. Some were gentlemen, the rest were ordinary people. We've got butchers, weavers, tailors, shoemakers and labourers, most were the common trades. There were also husbandmen and yeomen. Occasionally, there were women drawn to this beacon of hope. The town records tell that in 1479, Elizabeth and Robert Beaumont of Hetton in West Yorkshire arrived and claimed sanctuary. Elizabeth Beaumont was a gentlewoman from Hetton in West Yorkshire, and she was rich, didn't have to work. Robert was her relative, and perhaps a brother or a son, we don't know. And he was a literatus, or learned person. Perhaps someone who would work in a university today would be an equivalent. And they sought sanctuary for killing Thomas Alderley of Almonbury. He lived near to them. We don't know anything of the circumstances of the murder. If they'd not sought sanctuary, they would have been executed. So they made the 75-mile journey across to Beverley. Now, most likely Elizabeth would have been burned at the stake if she'd been convicted, and Robert would have been hanged or beheaded. So they were probably banished and went to live abroad. But it just gave that second chance. So almost half the people seeking sanctuary were accused of murder. Medieval society was far more violent than today. The murder rate is thought to be 20 times higher than it is today. And one of the reasons is because weapons were more readily available as everyone carried their own personal knives. An argument could quickly escalate into something more serious. And like today, some murders were planned. All kinds of people were involved in murders, even clergymen. Women were also very vulnerable. They were essentially viewed as men's property. So domestic violence was very, very common. So retaliation for domestic violence could, of course, lead to murder. So the penalty for thefts over the value of 12 pence was death. And about 10% of the people seeking sanctuary had been involved in some kind of theft. This could have stealing from shops, robbing people, or the road, stealing horses. So many of these sanctuary seekers were fleeing creditors. The debts owed varied from the records from £5, about £2,500 today, to £100, about £50,000. Most of the debtors apparently were butchers, by the way, who thought they'd come and try a new life here because Beverley was a centre for sheep and livestock, so consequently they could start again as butchers here. So people came to Beverley hoping they could stay and start a new life. It is imbued with the start of renewal and restarts. So after 40 days in the Minster, the Girthman would go and meet the coroner at the boundary of Beverley. And they had several choices. They could go to trial and accept the punishment, which was probably execution. They could leave the Minster and become an outlaw, which means living quite literally outside of the law. If anyone killed you, they'd not be punished. You have no recourse to protection whatsoever. Being banished from England, also known as abjuring. And abjurers went to the nearest port and got on the first boat leaving to start a new life abroad. So it wasn't a death sentence, but it would be if you stayed. They would also have an A branded on their thumb for abjurer. So this made it very, very, thank you, Joey, made it very difficult to settle in new countries because it was obvious you were a felon. You'd confessed to a serious crime. But Beverley's sanctuary area is so large that it's almost certain it was exploited. Beginning kind of 2 miles beyond the town, it's believed this enabled many to simply fit in, to disappear, to go off radar, as you might say. And so this is kind of the remarkable story about this beautiful town here in East Riding, is that for many of the people that live here, that have roots here, that can put their family tree into this place in the ground, there's every chance, if you come from this area, that one or more of your ancestors was a medieval murderer, criminal, or fugitive from the law. So there we go. I do hope you enjoyed our slightly darker take than normal tour of Beverley. I think I'll come back and talk about other things. There's lots of history here. There's lots I haven't showed you today. But I thought coming in towards Halloween would do 2 or 3. We'll do Ghost of the Gardens next week and focus on some of those darker elements for this time of year. So there we are, the west end of the Minster. So again, next time, if I can't get inside, what we'll do is we'll go in and we'll film some stuff inside. We'll do a blended tour of interior and exterior, bringing St Mary's and Beverley Minster and others. But I do hope that you enjoyed today's narrative, that it works. We can't actually get in. It's all shut off, so we'll come on a day, obviously, where I can get in. But isn't it wonderful? It's absolutely delightful. Thank you, Fran. I'm glad you enjoyed it. As I say, a bit different, but having come across this information about the prisons and the crimes and the punishments and so forth, it seemed that it was thank you, Diane. It seemed like a nice, juicy subject matter to get our teeth into for a Sunday tour. So there we are. The light is starting to go down, and thank you, John. Very pretty town. So as I say, it's certainly a place to visit if you're in this part of the world. We're in East Yorkshire, so probably about 50 minutes to an hour's drive from York, So it's sort of fairly near York, not hugely near York, but Hull isn't at all far away from here. And of course you've got the wonderful Yorkshire Wolds in this area as well. So plenty to see. Market towns of Driffield and Market Wheaton. So I'm enjoying visiting East Yorkshire in a minute. So I think we'll do some more East Yorkshire tours in the coming weeks and months. So having done Stamford Bridge, it is nice to bring you. Look at that just above the door, but I'll just show you the above what I think is the east door. Unless my geography is going to pot, which is not at all unlikely. I'm assuming that's the Apostles, but I could be, of course, wrong. Let's just count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I think we've got 12 Apostles there, and Jesus in the middle. Thank you very much. So there we go. I'm just going to flick over. So thank you, Christopher. Was it Christopher, I think, who joined us? I'm not quite sure how you found us, Christopher, but I'm delighted that you have done. Do come back again. If you also, Christopher, want to click and follow, subscribe to this YouTube channel, that'd be fantastic. Also, could you, if you look through Facebook, All Points North with John is the group where the content that obviously I put up, we talk about that, and it's a very friendly, nice community. Meet some people, and we hope to see you again very soon. So from Beverley, everybody, thank you so much for your support and leaving a contribution. Christopher, the way that we support these tours, for those who are able to, as and when you can, it's not compulsory, entirely by choice, but if you feel that you enjoyed it and you'd like to leave a consideration, there's links in the chat there at the top to buy me a coffee or PayPal, and that will be very, very nice. And we use those to cover the cost of petrol and so forth, and to treat Humphrey, who's my doggy. So if you join the Facebook group, you'll soon find out all about Humphrey. And thank you, Catherine B, who has done us a lovely design for our Christmas card. So we're putting that up tomorrow, put it on the printers, and hopefully we'll find out about doing a Christmas card. And we've got about a month then to get it printed and get it sent out to North America, to the USA, to Canada, wherever you're based, and obviously anywhere else around the world. I think we've got a month, so we'll get those orders in fairly quickly, and those that do will write you a hand-signed card and get it winging its way to you, so that's with you before Christmas. So that being said, thank you so much, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. So from Beverley in East Yorkshire, this is John saying goodbye.